What's up, family? I'm so excited to be here another week. I think this is our fifth week of Woke Wednesdays in this format, and I am grateful for our panelists that we have today who are luminaries of Black church traditions and social justice and and their intersection with social justice. And I'm going to introduce them in a moment, but I do want to acknowledge that as you are populating this experience, that we want to remind you that voting is an imperative. It ought to be an article of faith in this particular moment as we are heading into, as we are currently living in a very real crisis, a political crisis, an economic crisis that has already been exasperated by the moral crisis that we call America. But we have an opportunity in these next couple of weeks. We got 7 to 8 weeks to demonstrate the power of people power. We have this moment, these experiences of teaching and movement building, so that once we get to the polls, however, we are exercising our right to vote, whether we are mailing in, which is highly recommended and safe and not a form of fraud, or we are going to our various polling sites. We must be very clear that our vote is a nonviolent weapon, that our vote is a part of our repertoire, our arsenal as love revolutionaries, people who I've named throughout these last several weeks as first responders of democracy. This is what I love about the Black church, the black churches, right? This is what I love about the history of a particular wing of the Black church that has had a protest tradition, a resistance tradition, is that it has been that wing of American Christianity that has demonstrated again and again the capacity and the power to be responders, first responders when democracy fails, when democracy flatlines, when democracy exploits and preys and does not live on, preys on, and does not live up to its founding ideals. And so we are in the most consequential election of our lifetime. I feel like every election cycle, I say this is the most consequential election of our lifetime. And you know what? Maybe it's true. Maybe every election is the most important election of your lifetime. It's definitely the most important election in that moment. This is the most important election of your life. And so we want to figure out how we can, through the Black church, through Black churches, mobilize and organize Black America. That's what we want to do. We want to use the engines of Black churches to mobilize Black America, Black Americas, in order for us to live up to do what actually this country does not deserve, and that is to make this country be what it says it is on paper. I'm clear that America does not deserve Black people, but I know for sure America does not deserve Black women. And I'm grateful that we have 2 Black women on who are clergy, who are scholars, who are voices that really help to make their communities and the larger community much better. I am grateful that we have Reverend Dr. Kelly Farrow, who is the CEO, the leader, the originator, the founder of Circle of Fire, right?
Sacred Fire.
Circle of Sacred Fire. She is a phenomenal preacher who serves across the kingdom, across the community of faith in some very dynamic ways. And I'm grateful that she's bringing her wisdom, her expertise, her passion for justice to this work. We're grateful to have Reverend Danielle Ayers, who is the Minister of Social Justice at the Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. She also serves as the convener of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, which is, the Proctor Conference is the Black Vatican. And so we're grateful for her expertise. And we have my brother, someone who I have the joy of doing life with, a joy of thinking through theology and ministry and the future of the church, one of the most creative people I know, Reverend Alfonso Campbell, who is a youth and young adult pastor at Zion Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. So he's in the nation's capital, in the shadow of the empire. He is in the backyard of the man that we call president, who now lives at 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza.
Right.
And I'm grateful that you guys are all here with us today. Listen, I took a lot of time to do that because what we really want to know, we really want to hear from you all about, the role. I mean, in large part, we want to think about the role of staff pastors, the role of even associate clergy who don't have formal titles in our congregations. What does the work of congregational mobilization look like, right? How do people who serve in the second seat, people who serve where you all serve, with such creativity and such dignity, and I'm sure with such patience. I know you have great pastors, but I know my staff, they serve with great patience as they're working with me. So that's kind of the framework that I want us to think through today. But the first question I want to ask, and this is for everybody, all of us, or you can reject the question altogether, is that, but in this moment of racial reckoning, how have demonstrations and direct actions in your local setting, in your town, in your neighborhood, how have they been sustained? How have they waned? What's going on in your communities?
Okay, I'll start. But first, I want to make one slight correction. I am the co-convener of the St. Louis Proctor Conference, because I certainly co-convene with Dr. Ivica Brothers, which is a privilege. So much help with doing that. So I think—
keep me out of trouble too. Keep me out of trouble.
Yes. Let's keep the narrative correct, right? We're all about right narratives. So I think one of the things here locally in Dallas, what has sustained not only the demonstrations, but beyond being in the streets, I think, and I think it's so fitting that this is also called Freedom Summer, right? This idea of a Kairos moment. What does it mean to take advantage of a critical and pivotal point? And I think the pandemic really becomes a blessing in disguise for us, because I think it's somewhat of an emptying out of a stadium and our opportunity to fill it back up with what we think it needs to be. And so locally, a lot of our young organizers have really done an amazing job of not just allowing people to march in the streets and rally, but then they turn to opportunities to do resistance training. They turn into opportunities to allow people to understand it's not just marching, but how do we look at public policy? So for example, we had a series of virtual town hall budget meetings for the city of Dallas. So while we're marching in the streets, we're also circulating information on how you can understand what the budget means, break it down for everyday people to understand it, and preparing people with scripts and understanding what the budget means. What does it mean to defund the police? And how are we looking at our budget really being torn down and built back up to be more of an anti-poverty budget, as opposed to just moving things around, right? And so they did a great job at putting up websites, and you could, going through trainings on how to be prepared to talk, because you only get like 2 or 3 minutes at a virtual town hall. But they did a great job at really sustaining it by keeping people engaged, connecting and engaging and informing and educating people. And so I thought that was a good way of keeping the movement going beyond the streets. When you leave, you still have something to do. And that is one of many things that are taking place just at the local level and at the ground level to keep people engaged. I know coming up on the 12th and 13th, they're going to do some more resistance training. So they really are being intentional about how do we continue to educate people on the importance of public policy as we're out in the streets and as we're rallying, that we clearly understand what does it mean to deal with the root cause of the problem, to uproot, right, and deal with the systematic issues that take place around the country, obviously, and really globally, but certainly how do you change that where you live, right? Making it very that all politics is local type of thing. How do you get people connected and engaged at the local level? So I think that's one of the ways it's being sustained, is just having people to have an outgrowth opportunity to stay connected and engaged, and connecting the dots for people where they can feel empowered And not that you're just telling them what to say, but you're empowering them with information and the opportunity to find their own voice in this movement that is somewhat decentralized, right? Like we all have the ability to stand up, to speak up, and be a part of the change that we're seeking. And what I would also consider this a Kairos moment for us, particularly with this election looming, and what does that really mean?
Trey, what's going on in DC?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. It's similar. I think we know right after George Floyd and of course Breonna Taylor, with Breonna Taylor as well, everyone came out, and it was, energy was brought out against the National Guard was brought out, police were brought out, and so we were like literally face to face with these these militarized persons, and for us it was just eye-opening with that. But I think since then what I've realized too is just off of social media has been key for us. It's just simply giving us access for information, so not just hearing from the things that the narrative that the mayor and those who are in position are saying, but I think for a lot of organizers are doing as well, is also kind of giving us the counter side of the narrative, that they're also saying like this is what else is going on right now. Like, for example, we're calling for defunding, but we're still seeing the money is still being pumped into it, and keeping us in the loop about that. I think that's been primarily the thing that I've kind of seen as far as like the sustainability model. It's just how particularly Twitter has kept us in the know. If you really want to tap into the underside, right? Like there is one message that's coming from those who are in offices, and then there is those who are organizing, who are on the streets, who are still going out down to the White House, still putting their bodies on the line as well. That's the other thing that hasn't really given us down as far as the majority of people, but I think it is also kind of kept up as far as just those who are really kind of like tapped into the spirit of disruption and disrupting the model that's at hand. Those people are still out there, and so I think that I've kind of seen it through the social media world, but then also those who are still going down and saying like this is not right.
Here in NY, so I'm in Harlem, and so the sustainability model has been transient, right, because of COVID and all of the impact that certainly hit this city really, really, really hard, and still trying to recover. We're doing pretty good because I've called Governor Cuomo my 45. So he stepped into the role of 45 because I don't know what's happening out there in DC with that foolery there, but Cuomo's running our state real well. And so part of the sustainability model for me has been being a connector of people. So being in contact and connection with the clergy liaison at the governor's office, at Cuomo's office, and working with Reverend Clement James and making sure that clergy and churches know what's going on at the state level and what they're trying to push to make sure that we have what we need, whether it is PPE, whether it is making sure information gets to Latino and Black neighborhoods, and the far reaches of Brooklyn to Washington Heights. One of the schools I teach at, Manhattan, some of my students are Black and Latino. And when COVID first hit, their parents, they don't know English. And so my students are second generation immigrants. And so sometimes the information just wasn't getting there, right? So working with the mayor's office to make sure that all the information that comes via email or via handwritten is accessible and in languages that people can understand, so we know how to protect ourselves in the midst of being in this particular city where we live on top of each other. And so I don't know how Florida is doing down there, because that's just absolutely ridiculous. If we have 9 million people here in the NY and we can keep it below 1%, the rest of the country can get it together, because we were a little devastated for the first couple of months, but it's okay now. So it's kind of working hand in hand, right? It's making sure that for me personally, that I connect with resources, that connect resources with people, and resources, people, places, and things, and information. And so that we know, if don't no one else know who to call, sometimes folks just call Kelly Farrell, because she might know somebody. And if she don't know somebody, she knows somebody who knows somebody. That way we don't feel isolated. We don't feel like there's no way to kind of resolve and connect and make sure that, because listen, COVID turned into a political thing and it turned into a social thing because we found out that it disproportionately affects African and Latinos. And so we realized in Brooklyn and the South Bronx and in Harlem that there wasn't some information that was getting to us that was just killing us. And that becomes a social justice area. That becomes a political movement. So, well, let me hit up the governor's office like, Governor Cuomo, we need your help over here. Bill de Blasio, we need your help over here. Like, there are just not in the projects. Listen, people my grandmother's age are not going to the doctor. They do not trust the doctors. And that historically we understand why, because they were guinea pigs. So then we need to set up testing that is mobile. So we had testing at churches and testing in neighborhoods. And so that folks who wouldn't go to CityMD because they're not going to go, that they can come to the church and get tested. And so that becomes how you mobilize and make sure that the community is attached to the resources and make that less about politicizing and more about public health.
That's good. I'm interested in, obviously, I mean, there are vibrations happening in each of your locations. How have you been able to identify a particular faith presence, right? I know, I follow you guys on social media, so I see what you guys are doing, and you all represent the best of Black faith traditions. But how has the larger community of Black churches been involved in movement building on the local level? I mean, you guys know, like I know, that that there's no monolithic Black church. We know that the majority of Black churches are not going to be a part of the movement building. And we say that, and what we really mean when we say that is that the majority of Black male pastors aren't going to be a part of the movement, because if we want to be honest, I could probably guarantee that most of those Black sisters in the 60s and those young Black folk in the 60s who we don't count as leaders were probably members of somebody's church, which means that Black churches were showing up even when Black male pastors weren't showing up. So Black churches have always been bigger than Black male pastors, or the pastor in general, right? So how have you guys seen, and comparing to that, there's a narrative right now that there's antagonism between, young protesters and the religious institutions, or institutionalism, period. Have those fault lines existed where you are, or have you seen, Black faith leaders? Have you seen multi-racial faith coalitions come together and do significant things on the ground during this period of racial reckoning?
For me here, mostly I've seen Black churches coming together. I don't know if I've necessarily seen, outside of some partners we have at Trinity Wall Street, because Trinity Wall Street is a church downtown in Wall Street area. They've partnered with some Black churches, but mostly, and I say that particular church is Episcopalian and mostly predominantly white, but we do have some white allies in that particular church setting. And so coming together,
predominantly rich.
And so having that conversation and partnering with them, and I have colleagues that work there that are interested in moving the needle in that way, that has worked. So when I think about churches here in Harlem and certainly in Brooklyn, so, Pastor Gabby and Andrew Wilkes formed a social justice oriented church. So everything about DLE is social justice movement and social justice sermons, and how can we impact the neighborhood, and where can we make a difference at, and partnering with other churches in Brooklyn. So you have, I think, Rashad Moore's in Brooklyn, and there's a few others that Berean that we partner with, or that partner do work together, like even simple stuff like Ash Wednesday, and having mobile ashes in the train station and coming together with churches like that way, right? So in Harlem here, same thing. Baptist Ministers Conference led a protest from in front of Convent, which is my other church home, to the State Building. And so there has been a consistent movement here and there. When I say here and there, like I say, well, every couple of weeks and every couple of months. Now, when I watch the news, I see faith leaders and an interdenominational amount of faith leaders, like in the bigger marches downtown. And that's been encouraging too. I'm not necessarily sure what all the churches are who have participated in it, but it was nice to see white allies with Black and brown faces in protest.
Good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't know if I can necessarily speak to all of the churches that are kind of doing things in DC, especially with the pandemic. It's been kind of hard to be in relationship with different churches, but I can probably speak more so to the dissension that has kind of like occurred, to where those who are on the streets, those who are actively participating in direct action and demonstrations, that there is a frustration there, right? Like that they want to hear churches call out more than just the racist acts that are going on, but actually talking to the structural racism, that they want to hear that that there are systemic issues, and that the stuff that is going on is embedded in the DNA of America, and not just some moralizing platitudes that are being spit from the church. I think that what I've kind of seen, especially for me, like I place myself more in a observation role of just kind of seeing what the people are talking about, and been kind of seeing what churches are saying. Because I do think that happens sometimes. What you see sometimes also is there are like peaceful protests that churches do that sometimes seem to try to co-opt what the organizers are doing, right? As if what the organizers are doing is too out there, or it's anarchy, or things of that nature. And I don't know how much conversation is always taking place, but there are bright spots where there are certain pastors that are trying to do some work, particularly within the community. I'm thinking of Delonte Golston in DC, who does peace walks occasionally. He's constantly on the battle in protesting, constantly fighting for the people. So things of that nature, where I see that a little bit, but I do see a lot of that dissension sometimes in more of us. There's a rising consciousness towards the structural ills of society that I think more people want to hear the church not just address, but also put into practice as well.
Yeah, so where I have seen faith presence, where I've identified that. So keeping in mind that the context in which I do ministry will be in what they would call the buckle of the Bible Belt. So in Dallas, it is a very conservative place, right? Just theologically, and what it means to what faith and public life, how they intersect. That means it's a big difference in terms of how churches view that, and Black pastors who are in Dallas as well. But what I have seen in some ways in which churches who are typically not engaged and involved are becoming engaged and involved in ways that they feel for them will be an entry point. So for example, the COVID testing. So we were one of the first churches to be a site where we offered COVID testing, because obviously, like in many places in Black communities, there was not access. But then we had other churches who normally you never hear really being connected, engaged, and speaking out against the health, like there's been a public health crisis and inequities. They're starting to have a conversation about that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an entry point for a lot of the churches here to even talk about that. And I think the other ways I've seen faith show up is also in voter engagement activities. So we are trying to be a central hub in terms of what does it mean, not just to register people to vote, not just get out to vote, but we're trying to be a central place where we actually sign people up to be election judges, poll clerks, and poll monitors, right? Also, this idea of anticipating the headwinds and the intimidation factor that's going to take place in Dallas County, and how do we prepare people to feel empowered, engaged, and be trained and be paid to work the polls. So I think for some congregations who normally shy away from that, they see how critical the moment is, and that they're going to have to step out their comfort zone a little bit and at least be engaged in elections in ways that can staff our polling locations. Because what we experienced in our last location, during voting time, all of the Republican judges boycotted. They didn't show up at our polls. So it made long lines, didn't have elections. It just created frustration for people. So this time we said we're going to intentionally build up our own group of people to work our own polling locations, so that didn't happen again. Because we anticipate much more, politics going on in November. So for us, I think that's where we're starting to see a little fade to, I can identify that in those ways, the voter engagement, the COVID testing has allow people to talk a little bit about what does it mean to have for the faith voice to talk about health inequities. And it's been a public health crisis, and the intentionality, this is not just by happenstance, but by design, that our communities didn't have access. But not only that, then bringing out what does it mean to have a history of medical apartheid in our communities, right? And how that's deeply connected to a structure. And so I think they're trying to find their way in those spaces. And to answer your question about organizers in the church, I can speak for some experiences that we've had. So for example, with Movement for Black Lives, we're working with them. They're doing a traveling town hall where they literally go around to just parking lots and allow people to still speak to their elected official, because again, they cut you off. They don't allow enough time for you to really lift your voice. So they decided to do traveling town hall. So we'll be hosting one of those in our parking lot a week from Friday. So for us, it's how we are very intentional about, really for me, it's always, if we have shared agenda items and we can find common ground, let's just move forward with that. We're not going to agree on everything, but how do we allow folks who are already leading, for us not to say we have to come in and lead, but how can we use our resources to support you? If that means we need to open up the building so you can have a place just to rest, right, to feel safe, then we should do that. So for me, it's just about keeping that door open, and thank goodness, a lot of the young organizers, I just have a relationship with them. So another way I've seen us really try to be intentional about engaging and lifting up their voice. So for example, Mercedes Fulbright, who is certainly an amazing young leader here in the city, we had her come in and talk. We did a little conversation with her with the youth, right? So it allowed Mercedes to talk about the different ways in which you become politicized, and understand the difference between movement building, right, and marching. Right, something's about building this infrastructure that can survive all of us when we're gone, right? Where the next generation is not starting from scratch. Like there's some institutional memory that's being created. They're reading, they're writing, understanding policy, putting the policy platform together. So we don't have to do that. If BYP 100 is doing that, why not bring that into the space? Right, and where we connect, we make those connections. So I think we're trying to be very intentional about really linking up and just, doing this journey together, right? And where we don't see things eye, that's fine. And I think we need to be okay with that. We need to be okay with everybody doesn't have to be 100% on the same page, because really we all looking to make sure we all survive.
Amen.
Today it's about our Black people gonna make it up out of this thing.
Right.
So I think that's where we see, well, at least how I see the work, and how we make sure that we just try to be as inclusive as possible and not co-opt. But that does not mean that we can't look at some churches as political homes for people.
I appreciate what Danielle said, Willie, because we need to do better in partnering. We need to do better in collecting and being collective resourcefulness. We need to do better with, you can have this part of the pie, you have that part of the pie. So we move the whole thing forward, opposed to just fighting and doing it in our small little corners. So if you have if your Facebook or your social media is your platform, then you raise your voice there, and you teach other people how to raise their voice there. And you might even have a little meeting about, because my Facebook, you have to change sometime. I'll be saying some stuff. So, but you get people some stuff to give them some courage to, you know what I'm saying? But you work together. I feel like the way the Black church is going to get it done is by working together. So this is my first time meeting Danielle. Hey, I'm glad to know her, because now I know somebody else in Dallas, and my godmother lives in Dallas. But, I'm just saying, so you'll know who and where your people are, where your tribe is at. So like she said, so Black people will survive this thing, because they're trying to kill us, y'all.
Yeah. I'm interested in the question, and I don't want to put the Reverend Ayers on the spot with this question, so I'll ask it in a way that if she gets to it, she gets to it. If she does, she does. Black freedom churches have consistently been targets for white violence and white destruction. And I often wonder if part of what mutes and silences a lot of Black faith leaders' voices is the kind of risk that come about by being very vocal about one's commitment to justice, right? Particularly that kind of unabashed commitment to Black people and Black futures, right? It can attract violence from rogue white vigilantes, white mobs,
right?
And it can also attract resistance from Black folk, right? We know that as well, right? So I do want to have a measured conversation, right? A nuanced conversation that way. But you know, maybe you can think experientially. Let's think experientially on how this might have happened in your life if you have an opportunity to do that. But if not, like, what must Black churches be willing to risk in order to do this work of Black power building?
Do you really want the answer to that? Willie, I almost want to say everything, because everything is already on the line, right? This is not, we can't half-ass this one. We can't go in half-step in. We can't play game. When they say, when folks is killing Black people on the street, like the streets are our caskets, like we just gonna have a funeral right here in the street, then listen, as my granny would say, lay down your Bible and pick up your gun. Somewhere I'm between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Malcolm said, respect everybody, don't put no hands on nobody, but if they put their hands on you, put them in the ground. I'm somewhere near that, and I don't know about Martin with the cheek thing, because you hit me, I'm gonna knock the hell out you. So for me, and I'm still gonna love Jesus. So for me, and I'm still gonna go to heaven. So for me, there needs to be some sort of certainly balance, right? I'm not saying to be violent, but I'm also saying to be very courageous, right? Do not allow people to intimidate you. Do not allow that what folks think they're going to take away from you, that you can't get that restored. But if they take your dignity and they take your respect and they take your integrity, and that takes your power, and then that might be hard to be restored. So everything is on the line for Black lives. Everything is on the line for Black church. And when we try to nitpick what areas we want to choose to sacrifice, we end up falling between the cracks and getting crushed anyway. So make a conscious decision and about what can I afford to lose, maybe, right? But be very intentional about that, opposed to just saying, oh, I don't want my members to be. Look, if you're in justice work, there's going to be toxic white culture and stuff that's not going to like you how. Hell, they don't like you when you get up in the morning, right? So just get comfortable in that. Get comfortable and be all right with, folk is not going to like me because I'm in this work. And then figure out from that point moving forward, because there are going to be people that do like you and that are going to support you. And that's going to be your community and where you can pull power from. But if you operate from the spirit of fear, and you operate from, they're going to take everything, well, I'm not going to regain this, you're starting to lose now. But if you operate from, we can do this, and let me find a collective that will do it with me, you might have a better shot. But I think everything is on the line.
Yeah, and I think for me, everything is on the line. And I think for me, the mentality becomes, it's not only what are we willing to risk, but also how are we willing to live. I think that when I think about Jesus, like the fact that we focus in on the death, but it's not necessarily just the death; it's the way he lived, right? Like he was always going against structures that was oppressing and keeping people down.
Right, countercultural, right?
It's countercultural, right? And revolutionary. And if we are going to say that we want to be like Jesus and we lift up this Jesus, then I think we have to decide how are we going to live. And if that means death, ultimately death is going to come regardless, right? But if that means death a little earlier, and I know that's hard, and I'm not saying that everybody has to live under that mindset, but I think at some point, if we're going to stand as an institution against, against racism, against colonialism, against imperialism, against capitalism, then we're going to have to be able to say that I live for things, right? Like it's not necessarily what we're fighting against all the time, but also deciding what are we living for. And so I think that has to become the mindset for our churches, that, I'm willing to risk it because I choose to live, right? Like part of the reason that white violence comes to us is because we've decided to stand on our own and say, I exist, I live, I'm being, And so I think for me, it's just that decision of like deciding to live and deciding how I'm going to live, right? No longer saying that the system is going to, I got to assimilate to a particular system, but learning how to detach myself from this system and now living in what real freedom is and not American freedom.
Yeah, both those responses are just amazing, just powerful. And let me just say, I'm so glad to be in community with Reverend Dr. Kelly Farrell. This will not be the last time I'm going to be in community with you. Listen, I'm with you on that, Malcolm and Martin. We could be Fannie Lou and Harriet, right?
Right. Man, Angela Davis, come on here. Come on.
So I say, we have to be certainly, everything is on the line and we have to be willing to risk it all. And all I can think about is ancestor James Cone when he said the church wants to save its life, is going to have to be willing to lose its life, right? And so I think for me, and it's also getting people to understand, because you're right, Reverend Francois, it is, at least here what I pick up on, it is this idea of if I'm that vocal, particularly, let me just talk about it in my context. So they see what happens to Dr. Haynes. They see the kind of vitriol that gets spit at him on his Facebook page, on his personal page. Of course, we get threatening this and threatening that, right? And so some people, they don't want to risk that, right? But for me, I'm always saying, but look at the other ways in which you're being killed slowly every day.
Yes.
Right? So I think about how we have to be able to show, yes, the physical violence is so much more traumatizing, right? Because it's so in our face. But what about the structural violence? Black folks every day than physical violence, right?
A little microaggressions.
Right. So to me, it's like, so even when you're quiet, you're still not living well, right? And as Trey was saying, right, it's like, how are you going to live? So to me, that's still living in fear.
Yeah.
It's still really, in a sense, for me, I think it's still, in a sense, in a way, really engaged in self-negation, right? It's this idea that you're really not lived up fully to your identity and who you are called to be.
Right.
If you have to not speak out, not say this in fear of what might happen to you.
Right.
The reality is, if you step outside when you allow them to box you in, particularly as a faith leader, when you step outside of any box they put you in, you're going to be attacked.
Yeah.
Right. Also, always buffering that with the people that you're preaching to every day. They go out and live that reality every day. But also to me about how do we even have church in ways where people can be able to not bifurcate it, right? Not have this dualistic theology, but understand, you your pastor really should speak about your life between Sundays.
Yeah.
You have something to say about that.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, and let me say this, and we're going to be transparent. I know there have been people who have come to our church and say, can you help us with X, Y, and Z? Have you talked to your pastor? Oh, no, he's not going to talk about that. So you're going to a church, supporting a ministry does not want to help you out because they don't lift their voice, right? And so I'm saying I personally would not go to a church, support a church who would not support me in the time of need just because it may put you in a position where you feel you may be going against the grain, maybe stepping outside this box that may bring heat to you. So for me, I think and they just need to understand that one of us don't make it, we all not gonna make it, right? They're not saying you were quiet, we'll let you make it.
Right.
The communities. I see these churches that sit in communities where environmental racism. Example, Marsha Jackson's Shingle Mountain. That when I met her, maybe she was taking no medication. Now she has a dresser full of medication. Fiberglass is caught in her throat. She can't breathe. She has to wear a sweatshirt in Texas in the summer to walk her dog. Right? Her granddaughter is 12 years old. She can't go out and play. She doesn't like to go outside. Her asthma pump and dosage has been doubled. And I'm saying, who is saying you have nothing to say about that? Right. But also, how do we begin to show people not just the physical violence that's killing us that we have to be very vocal about, but it's also the structural violence.
Yes.
That we have to be just concerned about and sound the alarm. And Black churches have to do more about that because it's our people who are being subjugated to that. And we have some white, what I would call white co-conspirators in the city. George Mason is a classic example. He, from his pulpit, preaches about white privilege, white supremacy. Like he's very vocal about that. People have left his church because of that. And that, to me, is what it means to put it on the line, to speak truth to power, to tell the truth. Right. And not be afraid about what might happen, because you just have to be willing to stand in that truth and do what is right. And so that's kind of how I see that, particularly in this city. It definitely brings a lot of, we get a lot of attention, right? And I don't think people understand just how much we carry sometimes because of our stance on a lot of issues and being, not only that, but being unapologetically Black.
Unapologetically black. Say that one more time.
On the side of the pews, in the pulpit.
Right. Right.
I mean, so it's and a Black Lives Matter huge banner that you can see from the freeway. I think that's intimidating for people.
Mm-hmm.
To
And I think it's enough, Danielle.
blackness that way.
I think it's enough for churches. I think I'm tired of black churches making apology all the time. I'm tired of us having to say I'm sorry all the time. When you have George Mason, look, if white folks can get up in their pulpits and say whatever the heck they want to say, why are we still with the one finger up, tipping out the back? Excuse me. I'm done with enough is enough with that, right? At this juncture, I mean, I'm gonna collect myself because I'm fixing to cuss. At this juncture, we need to not be held to a standard of apology all the time because we want to support Black lives.
Right.
The All Lives Matter. Kick rocks with the all. I'm not saying all lives don't matter. I'm saying that our young black men and women are dying at unprecedented rates and ain't nobody doing nothing about it. And we need to use our own voices, our own pulpits to say the same thing. And when people don't like it, oh well. And not saying I'm sorry or not trying to make apologies or make amends or be accepted. I don't. So some of here I go again. Some with Martin and Malcolm's theology. Martin was trying to be accepted, while Malcolm was not. Malcolm was like, we can get our stuff and go. Because I'm tired of dealing with. If we got to deal with white patriarchy, white toxic culture, white this, white that. Then you know what? Y'all keep y'all whiteness then, and we gonna go over here, right? And so we need a little bit of both. We need to be able to be free enough to say enough is enough. Yes, we are done dying. I've had enough of this. And no, my church, my congregation, our people, our community, our tribe, our continent is not going to say I'm sorry no more.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm sorry.
I think what I'm also hearing from our sisters too is that we have to begin to really get rid of the respectability politics that exists within our black church.
No.
That it's still, like we there's still a part of us that still want to be in proximity to whiteness, and then also to those black elites. As you said, like the other side of this is those who fight against us, who are becoming too radicalized, too revolutionary. And to me, what I'm realizing as I see some pastors that align with those who feel that we need to be more moderate, is that what we're doing is our black churches, instead of ridding of oppression, are still the host to oppressors. And we have to get to a point now where we can no longer be the host to oppression anymore. And that comes out of this idea of like, I have to look a certain way, I have to be a certain way, when the reality is that I don't care about how I look anymore. At the end of the day, I know about one thing, and that's the freedom of my people.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right.
It. Amen.
Good. Well, thank you three for sharing with us today. A very rousing conversation that has offered some deep insight on what our community, particularly the anchor into one of the anchor institutions of our community, Black churches, what they must be willing to sacrifice, give up, reimagine in order to save Black butts, man, save Black lives from the insistence of whiteness that attempts to delete us from not just American story, but from the promise that this country has made to the world in a very real way. I want everybody as they are logging off, I want you to make sure you go and visit thefreedomsummer.org. At thefreedomsummer.org, you can do three things. You can check your voter registration status. You can request an absentee ballot, and you can restart the process of registering to vote, all in one place at thefreedomsummer.org. You can make sure that you know your status. You can make sure that you have your ballot coming to your home if your state has not automatically done that for you, like ours in New Jersey has. Or you can start the process of registering to vote right there. There are several states across the country, not as many as there should be, but there are several states across the country that allow online voter registration. And then there are many that allow you to start the process online. And so however your state maneuvers in that area, you can start the process at thefreedomsummer.org. We have to vote. I cannot overstate the necessity of voting. That is the first stage in what it's going to mean to transition from just protest to real political power. And this is our opportunity. This is our time to put pressure on people who believe they have power and to let them know that we, the people, are still the ones that govern this nation. And so thank you for joining us for another Woke Wednesday. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Thank you, Reverend Danielle. Thank you, Reverend Alfonso, for sharing with us in the passionate and deeply incisive ways that you did.
Thank you, Dr. Willie.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Peace.
Bye.